Both Chris and I come from a long history, him in the military, me in counseling. I'm excited about some ways to raise awareness about helping people know what to report and how to connect to us. One of the challenges we have is that when we silo information to one location, it can create some limits on how we see that. Disaster prep is what we stand for. We do a lot of training in areas that are collaborative and overlapping. We have case studies we'll point you to throughout the course. Today, what we'll cover will be some basic foundational information, just making sure we're all grounded in that same space. For those of you who love checklists, I like me a checklist too. The problem with checklists, though, can be that they don't always take into account every different element of a particular case. There's an art and a science to it, and I think there's some preferences to it in terms of how people approach this work. I never get bored in my threat assessment classes because every time I'm teaching a concept, I learn it a little more deeply.
What I like about this is I'm not a huge checklist person because I
Yeah.
believe sometimes you get lost in a checklist. And I think you can utilize this tool as a checklist. That way you can look through and not necessarily go, okay, I got to ask this question.
So gathering data, determining risk, intervening, and then reassessment becoming really important. Part of multidisciplinary threat work is never being in a headspace where it's, I can do this alone and it's going to be great. So we're always going to be better when we look at this from the full gestalt, right? Understanding that each individual piece creates a larger picture bigger than the sum of its pieces.
If you're thinking about it instead of reacting to it, you're already behind the curve.
You can't rewind trepidation. Like you can't go backwards in time and wish you were more cautious. What I have learned is what's presented to me is never what I find once I start talking to the person. So at ideation and planning. So as someone's, I'm going to hurt people, they've hurt me, I'm going to punish them, I'm going to start thinking about what I'm going to do to them. Chris and I talk a lot about a layered security model that to really stop this kind of targeted violence or mass shooting, we need both behavioral threat assessment and physical security measures. One of the problems that we see in threat assessment that we just want to define early on is understanding, is the assessment that we're doing the correct one for the situation at hand? The problem we run into here is that people, when they're doing a psychological assessment, end up leaning into the idea that this is going to be the threat assessment. And it's just not. If you're interviewing a kid who, say, is like a sophomore who threatened another kid, said, if you don't shut up, I'm going to stab this pencil in your neck.
When I'm doing my assessments, okay, the pencil's a data point, but you could take a sharp stick. For me, I'm trying to assess more of what's your history of impulsivity, what's your history of your affective regulation, things like that.
Just because a kid has a knife doesn't mean he's a threat. It's just the weapon is not the one that we need to be worried about. The weapon is a weapon until somebody uses it.
You could have the best threat team on the planet and be a wonderful practitioner, but if no one's sending you stuff, you're not going to be getting the information that you need. So building trust in the community, building these referrals to the team, the types of referrals that we have coming in and going out. So every time I have folks in our classes, I always want them to leave with, wow, I got more than I thought I was going to get out of this.